Well, hello once again, my friends, my fellow historians, my fellow ocean liner lovers, and my fellow lovers of the beautiful SS United States. I'd like to welcome you to another video. Today is July 27th of 2026. Now, July celebrates or marks the 74th anniversary of the maiden voyage of the SS United States. Her maiden voyage took place on July 3rd of 1952. What we're going to do is we're going to take a look at that magnificent event, and for reference, we're going to be quoting from the SS United States by John Maxtone Graham. The book is John Maxtone Graham's SS United States, Red, White, and Blue Ribbon Forever. This is a W. Norton and Company, New York and London. The copy that I have is from 2014. And if you're curious, the ISBN number is 978-0393-241709. So the section we're going to be looking at as we go through the table of contents, actually, I think I'll run it down just to show you what this book has. So we got the Eisenhower decade, post-war shipboard, the remarkable Gibbs brothers, Leviathan restored, the Jazz Age transatlantic, SS America and another war, building the United States, Christening, Trials, and Maiden Voyage. Of course, that's what we're going to focus on in this video. The Glory Years, Withdrawal and Layup, and Dereliction and Reprieve. The first seminal event of every ship's life is laying the keel. For the Big U, 3 consecutive keel sections had been deposited by crane onto the floor of Newport News Shipway, number 10, at 10 o'clock on the morning of February 8th of 1950. She had grown from the modest beginning at a spectacular rate, crowding the confines of her berth. Once final hull sections were attached, 15 feet, 4.5 meters, the bow and stern overhung each end of the dock. Christening, the next significant milestone, after the keel laying would take place on just over 16 and a half months later on June 23rd of 1951. The veritable forest of staging had been disassembled and removed from the dock, lumber in sufficient quantity, the shipyard bulletin calculated to build a 2,000-ton wooden vessel 235 feet long. On June 22nd, the day previous, the dock had been partially flooded to a depth of 21 feet for the first time. Only then could the watertight integrity of all hull number 488, her underwater compartments, be rigorously confirmed. The next morning, at 0430 hours on Christening Day, more water was admitted. Half an hour later, the third largest ocean liner in the world was afloat. At once, after the gate beneath the stern was withdrawn and the vessel was dragged by cable sufficiently far out of its berth for inclination tests. Not until 10 a.m. was she winched back inside and positioned carefully, her cutwater snugged up to what had become a spectator area. Like a red, white, and blue spinnaker, a billowing cascade of bunting adorned the bow. That shipway, number 10, had been fully flooded early that morning, delighted William Francis Gibbs. As a result, not one of thousands of assembling spectators or reporters would have been able to decipher anything about his vessel's secret underwater configuration. As opposite to the keel, that which was laid in February, the chill June 23rd was sunny and humid. The 46th and 50th Street gates were open at 11 a.m. sharp. The public started crowding into the dock's dry area. Although an attendance of around 30,000 had been anticipated, only a third of that number showed up. The overriding humidity inevitably reduced attendance. What visitors described as a formidable knife edge of hull number 488, her bow, the compelling and undisputed centerpiece, in truth, was not like a knife's edge at all, but comfortably graspable by a single hand. Spectators discovered they enjoyed novel and gratifying proximity to the hull. Crowds witnessing a plunging launch must stand or sit relatively far from the ways. But those inside shipway number 10 on that hot June morning jostled to within feet of the vessel. The ceremony's most crucial prop, a champagne bottle, vintage unknown, was suspended on a beflagged line attached to the forepeak high above. Several large platforms, also bunting-decked, had been erected. Center stage was the speaker's platform, already sprouting its microphone cluster. A railed rectangle with staircase ascents, and a platform had been positioned directly beneath and within easy reach of the prow. Just to its right, taller but surprisingly modest area, a camera and press platform, achievable by ladder only. As christening time approached, it became jammed with the ungainly tripoded newsreel cameras of the day. The 50th Army Band was nearby. Fort Monroe was accommodated on yet a third bunting-clad platform, a short distance to the starboard. As always, the musicians had a capital view. Their music filled those sometimes endless waiting moments that every christening audience knew too well. Playing out beneath the merciless sun, they suffered cruelly from the heat, knit out in woolen uniforms, caps, and sand-brown belts. They were not alone for their discomfort. As the sun ascended over the increasingly airless dock, heat and humidity became oppressive. By day's end, more than 20 spectators would require treatment for heat prostration. As through underscoring the vessel's naval resonance, visible in neighboring shipway number 9, rose the gray-painted island of dry-docked carrier Lake Champlain. More naval resonance prominent among the spectator crowd were dozens of uniformed men, not only officers in whites with black, gold, and shoulder boards, but enlisted swabbies, also clad in whites. Though they mingled with hundreds of shirt-sleeved civilians, the christening remained indubitably and overwhelmingly a Navy show. Hull's number 488 was the first liner in the world built in a dry dock. Like so many of Gibbs' inspirations, it set the example for every other shipyard. Passenger hulls these days profit from what might be described as stealth launches. Once the dry dock in which they had taken shape is flooded, today's new builds float almost imperceptibly off keel blocks rather than plunge spectacularly down sloping ways and into the water. The launch master wanted the vessel pulled out of the dock at precisely low slack water. She would have moved from the berth immediately after being christened, requiring the godmother to be as tightly cued and deft as though dealing with the plunging launch. Once named, the vessel would recede at once, impelled in this event, not by gravity, but by winches, moving her bow out of reach with the same irreversible finality. A half-dozen tugs lined up outside were in place, ready to maneuver the SS United States south to her fitting-out pier the moment she emerged. Just prior to that exit, a champagne bottle had to shatter. Although the special excursion trains that brought government contingents from Washington arrived later than expected, nothing was delayed. The railway's predictable tardiness had been factored into the yard's scheduling. Visitors were bussed for early and hasty luncheons at local hotels, then to the yard and shipways at number 10. Awarded the honor of christening hull number 488 was Lucille Connolly, second wife of the Texas Senator Tom Connolly. Mrs. Connolly's two matrons of honor were her daughters, Mrs. Arthur E. Keyes and Mrs. Edward L. Cochran. The three of them, clutching bouquets, stood center stage on a platform beneath the bow as speakers and VIPs alike thronged the ascending staircases. An orgy of speechifying would open the proceedings. some exceedingly interminable and long-winded. It seemed counterproductive, programming for christening preliminaries. One of that ceremony's delights, no less than the excitement of seeing an enormous mass about to move for the first time, is its brevity and simplicity. Thousands assembling had to come and see a ship named and sit afloat, burdening them with a dose of political posturing beforehand tended to vitiate things. The launch master had explicably cued Fort Monroe's bandmaster at exactly 15 minutes past noon. Having just completed a Sousa march with a flourish, he struck up the national anthem. Those in the crowd either saluted, stood, or clamped damp-palmed a sweating t-shirt. When the crowd quieted as loudspeakers crackled and hummed into life. First at the microphone was J.B. Woodward, Newport News president, after quoting Mansfield's poem describing Queen Mary, that rampart of a ship. He reported that hull number 488 would not glide into thunder from the slip, but would be launched like no other. After further remarks, he introduced John Franklin, president of the United States Lines, who spoke at emotional length about his father, General Philip Franklin, who had headed the company before him. Then Senator Connally, husband of the vessel's godmother, would be retiring from the Senate shortly after 31 years' service, spoke at effusive length. At long last, the senator introduced his wife Lucille, the godmother. Before we deal with her stellar performance, it has always struck me that once again there was a glaring absence on the speaker's platform. No turn at the microphone had been scheduled for the man whose genius had been conceived and designed the vessel. By the same token, William Francis Gibbs was seldom at ease in pivotal social gatherings. The accompanying photograph says it all, revealing Gibbs in shirt sleeves looking curiously detached and confused, standing on a dock floor just below and, incidentally, well away from the speaker's platform. Finally, the time had arranged for Lucille Connally's moments in the spotlight. She performed with competence and brio. Before grasping the bottle, Mrs. Connally recited the traditional benediction clearly into the microphone. I christen this vessel, United States. May God bless her and all who sail in her. The next shipyard bulletin reported that she seized the champagne bottle and gave it a lusty swing. Thrusting it against a steel bow only inches away, she shattered it with one punishing blow. One of the best of dozens of christening photographs ever taken. Once christened, no longer hull number 488, but the SS United States, multiple winches on either side of the pier was activated. Cued by the christening shipyard, workers started the vessel into motion, and as though she was sliding down conventional ways, drawing just named United States firmly away from the launch platform and out towards the James River and her gauntlet of waiting tugs. Although under tow, United States afloat seemed a venerable red, white, and blue Jalen of an ocean liner. Already selected as her master was equally colorful Commodore Harry Manning, a former Navyman. He had begun his maritime training as a seaman in New York's nautical school ship Newport back in 1914. Finally, with William Gibbs and the Department of the Navy's approval, the pinnacle of his seagoing career was officially conferred, elevated to the rank of Commodore, United States Lines. Aged 55, Harry Manning was given the prestigious command of the company's latest flagship. It was he who climbed atop the vessel's bridge early in the morning of May 16th of 1952 in company with U.S. Lines President John Franklin and the Gibbs brothers. Master for the trials was Captain E.D. Edwards of the Virginia Pilots Association. His executive officer was Fred Fender. They would remain in command until such a time the ship was officially handed over. Cables were singled up, then slipped, and she was undocked and started moving slowly away from the pier. There is no more intoxicating moment in any passenger vessel's life. For 16 months, hull number 448 had been an inert prisoner, either in Shipway Number 10 or as a christened United States, but still shackled alongside her fitting out berth for an entire year. Although propellers were in place, they were not yet operable. She had been moved from one imprisonment to another, towed by half a dozen cautious tugs. Departure for trials was different. However, suddenly and miraculously, the United States was proceeding under her own power for the first time, like a child achieving its first halted steps across a nursery. Self-generated engine motion creates a distinctive and compelling sensation, an almost palpable shipboard perception that electrifies every crewman on board. Months had been spent toiling in anticipation for this long-awaited moment. For the men and women who would work with her, her first movement under her power was cherished wherever they served on board. Whether officer or quartermaster on the bridge, engineering the starting platform, steward making up the stateroom berths, sous chef preparing lunch, bartender slicing lemons for cocktails, even the lowliest hand mopping down an anonymous steel alleyway far below, all were captivated by the movement the United States' great heart began to beat. That steel beehive was, after all, their home away from home, and now remarkably and gratifyingly it had sprung to life. That crew response, incidentally, was not shared by most of the 600 visitors on board from New York and Washington. Those guests were outsiders, for whom the liner's departure from a berth was more than a routine preliminary for the trials to come, rather like undocking a ferry about to cross the Hudson or Potomac. For every one of her trials, Gibbs ordered, ruthlessly, confidentially down the engine room's starting platform. At his direction, William Kaiser's engineers cloaked every pressure gauge beneath, concealing canvas covers so that no reporters prohibited access to the engine room in any way could derive even the faintest hint of the vessel's operational performance. Gibbs' mania for secrecy was familiar to every crewman on board. With increasing revolutions in her four shafts and excitement in the vessel gathered speed would never again be equaled. Vibrant expectancy consumed every one of the crew as the SS United States headed majestically out to Jamestown Bay for her trials. The weather on that May 16th morning was bright and cheerful as the company's new flagship steamed to the Virginia Capes. The deep waters offshore, they would negate any possibility of retardation during the trials because of what is described as bottom interference. One of the disadvantages that plague customary used measures miles off Maine in Cuba. 2 hours later, when Kaiser was instructed to ramp up his incredible power plant, incredible speed was achieved, an astounding 30 knots in climbing. Rewarding phenomena emerged, one immediately the other to be confirmed back at the yards, a complete absence of vibration, and despite traveling at near never-before experienced speeds, extraordinarily low fuel consumption. The response through the vessel was ecstatic. Even the most uniformed visitors, essentially landlubbers, grasped immediately that they were aboard an incredible vessel, proving her extraordinary worth. One of those invited guests, George Sanchez, told a reporter, "I have never had such a wonderful time." Vice Admiral Edward L. Cochran, administrative chairman of the Maritime Commission, was quoted that day, "I'll be disappointed if it is not better than any liner afloat, or that any large naval vessel, larger than a destroyer's. We will do better." The first day's stunning achievement would be offset in the afternoon by a mechanical glitch. Alarms were triggered on temperature monitors mounted above two of the four main turbine bearings, the reduction gears. They were overheating, a not unusual response for new machinery subject to demanding performance. Those signals were early warnings only, no damage was done. But continuation of the trials was inadvisable until automated lubricant delivery to those bearings had been restored. The minute word came up from Chief Kaiser, bridge telegraphs were run down to speed throttle back. United States returned at slow revolutions alongside the pier to have the problem investigated. In fact, things would not be put right for a month. But at the time, the ship and the yard's engineers investigated those overheated bearings. They fitting out continued apace. Dating from those first incomplete but widely publicized trials on May 16th, SS United States achieved an instant mythic reputation nationwide. Kudos flowed from every direction, the kind of product hyperbole which press agents, public relations, and Madison Avenue regulars would happily kill. The ship and its reputation surely passed the solid gold allure of showbizery. Excellence conferred upon the era's cultural benchmarks. Long-running Broadway hits, Radio City Music Hall blockbuster, hypnotic weekly radio fare, or must have been Brentano's bestseller. That unstoppable word of mouth compelled even the uninformed to take notice. Not surprisingly, the most meaningful ships of Americans of the 1950s were warships, and understandable, a legacy of recent hostilities. Cherished foremost was America's first fighting ship, USS Constitution, or Old Ironsides. Similarly, Americans agreed with John Paul Jones about Nimitz not giving up the ship. These were devoted to ironclads Monitor and Merrimack. Dutifully remembered the Maine, savored Admiral Dewey's "You fire when ready, Gridley," and remained outraged. At the same time, they apparently cared little for historic vessels that were not warships. Scarcely cognizant of merchant fleets, the only exceptions were Titanic, of course, as well as Cunard, White Star's Queens, largely because of their indisputable wartime role in preparing for D-Day's buildup, and post-war delivering hundreds of GI brides to New York aboard Queen Mary. Few were familiar with the name Gibbs or had even the faintest idea what naval architect did. Then, too, transatlantic travel by sea was an option unavailable to most. The privilege of booking a stateroom that would race them from Europe was confined to a relatively small percentile of the population. Don't forget, 1950s preceded the flowering of popular Caribbean cruising for the masses. That would be inaugurated a decade later. Yet offsetting that almost universal merchant ship disinterest were ubiquitous raves about merchant vessels, United States. I sense it boiled down to the love of country, pure and simple, the same heartfelt national core that always inevitably moved William Francis Gibbs. Something about the liner's patriotic name, its red, white, and blue funnels, no less than a record-breaking performance, turned the country on. One is reminded of Franklin's instructions to the Gibbs brothers back in 1946, an outstanding ship the public can get behind, like a cup defender. United States crossed a remarkable maritime Rubicon. She became recognized and remembered ocean liner on a par with familiar warships cherished to the country and the country's national conscience. Indeed, the vessel's overt Americanism was one of the strongest suits. Future passenger 16-year-old Vicky French announced to her family that they had boarded in Southampton for return to New York. Made them so welcome, not to Europe, so America. Another passenger suggested, "We're back in America already." On the European continent, however, U.S. lines seduced potential Gallic clientele differently. Obviously, United States appeal was peddled according to readers' specific nationality. Robert Lloyd's jacket cover painting for this volume reproduces in glorious color the famous U.S. Lines aerial photograph of the United States galloping across the Atlantic. Its wide circulation, just after the Maiden Voyage, doubtless spread the big U word as well. Regardless of the May 16 trial's mechanical failure, word of mouth about her speed spawned mesmerizing interest across the nation. United States was not to depart the yard again until June 21st. Additional numbers had embarked for that occasion. Now, there were 1,704 on board, including an expanded national press contingent. senior United States Lines executive from New York, a bevy of officials from Washington's Maritime Administration, and the usual assignment of shipyard personnel. This time, when United States steamed out of the Jamestown Bay, she headed into the teeth of the Force 8 gale. There were no excessive bearing temperatures this time, but as anticipated, remarkably different excesses instead. The vessel tore across the surface, producing a fine haze of seawater the length of her boot topping. Despite punishing headwinds, speed of over 40 knots was achieved. Gibbs' flat stern plating, as well as the additional blade count on his inboard propellers, paid incredible dividends. At speed, United States' entire stern planned up toward the surface, to such an extent that drag was reduced to near non-existent. It was an unprecedented performance in every sense. The ship took blue ribbon in those turbulent waters off the coast of Virginia. Returning triumphantly to the yard, an up-ended broom secreted on board could be seen lashed out permanently to the summit of the vessel's only mast, blatant and time-honored symbol of the clean ocean sweep. Those second trials produced yet more crowning headlines. Though out-of-town reporters went home, New York's journalists remained on board to participate. The vessel's celebrated maiden entry into New York, her port of registry. Reverberations for her trials prompted members of the House Committee on Merchant Marine and Fisheries who had been on board to suggest that the companion vessel for the United States be put immediately into work, creating a balance like the two queens. On June 9th, preceding those official Jamestown trials were miniature trials of the 50-inch United States in Central Park's model boat pond. It was a gray, murky summer day on June 23rd of 1952, exactly a year after her christening. That incoming United States rendezvous off Ambrose Lightship was a quartet of U.S. Navy destroyers, USS Warrington, Perry, Goodrich, and William Wood. That official detachment was buttressed by a huge turnout of unofficial craft as well. Recruited effortlessly by some publicity, back on Sunday, June 15th, the United States Lines had placed an advertisement in the New York Times weekend magazine documenting the day's specifics. Those small boat owners ensured that New York would extend a zealous, almost hysterical welcome that would last for 6 hours. Then United States Garland, with signal flags, her mast still topped by the clean sweeping broom, paraded majestically up harbor. It was indeed a parade. 2 destroyer escorts steamed in the van, while the remaining pair followed astern. The disappointing weather could not dampen New York's municipal fervor. Third Officer John Tucker learned almost full-time on Big U's whistle, responding with deafening blasts to innumerable salutes from both her accompanying flotilla and other vessels moored alongside flanking Manhattan and New Jersey piers. 5 Morgan tugs waited in readiness to bring their change bow first alongside Pier 59. Clambering up to the traditional ladder from one tug were not one, but by 2 docking pilots. Chester A. Evans, assisted by Fred Snyder. After entering through one of the vessel's open-door ports, they were lofted to the bridge by elevator and stood in the drizzle on the starboard bridge wing. The final command after only 25 minutes was "Make fast as she is." Visibly impressed with the United States' remarkable maneuverability, both pilots assured Commodore Manning, "She sure handles easily." Then they handed him their Sandy Hook pilot chits for signature, shook hands with Gibbs brothers, and descended, grinning, to the pier. Over the next week and a half, hospitality was the order of the day. Chef galley staff, stewards, and maitre d' hotels were put up through their piers. The United States was inundated day and night. Thousands of privileged guests crowded aboard, either for lunch, black tie, a long dress, for cocktails, dinner, inevitably speeches. The length of one of the stifling day, the vessel was thrown open to the public, forerunners of the same compulsive admirers who would descend en masse on a sailing day. Later that inaugural week, United States tied up farther upstream on the south side of Pier 86, nowadays permanently co-opted by carrier USS Intrepid's Sea, Air, and Space Museum. Then the long-awaited day of departure arrived on the bright morning of July 3, 1952. Though there were accommodations on board in 3 classes for over 2,000, only 1,660 would embark for the maiden voyage. The U.S. lines were keeping a cautious reserve of vacant cabins available for passengers housed nearest to the propellers in the event their racket made sleep impossible. Empty alternatives would be needed to house them. About 50 of those discommoded by the unhappy making limitation clutches at straws, waiting with passports, tickets, and stacked suitcases in one corner of Pier 86 shed, hoping that the room might miraculously materialize. But it never did. Without exception, the prescribed passenger ceiling of 1,660 berths was ruthlessly maintained. Cabin class luggage tags were dark blue, while tourists were encircled with pale blue only. General John Franklin, head of the U.S. lines, and his wife boarded, accommodated for the maiden voyage in the duck suite. In those days, visitors overran departing ocean liners breathed along Manhattan's west side, new ones especially. The price of admission was negligible at 50-cent contribution to seamen's charities. There were no restrictions, and certainly nary a whisper of today's post-9/11 bugbear. That familiar dread buzzword, security. Sailing day, visitors' tally said it all. 8,000 boarded United States to see her off. 1,660 passengers, a more than 4-to-1 ratio. Another 5,000, according to police estimates, gathered along 12th Avenue to watch her sail. Most of those onboard visitors knew not one departing passenger. They were merely part of a systematic breed, endemic to New York and its suburbs, who were determined to inspect glittering United States firsthand. What doubtlessly attracted them in such plenitude had to have been the vessel's remarkable Jamestown performance, no less than her high, well-publicized arrival 10 days earlier. If they could not sail on the maiden voyage, even if they might not embark again in any capacity, at least they could tell their children and grandchildren that they had been aboard the legendary Big U on the day of her maiden departure. Chief Purser John Locke later reported that those visitors accompanied delivery of 5,000 parcels, 5,000 pieces of mail, a venerable blizzard of 12,000 telegrams, and in 1950s, long predating today's preoccupation with cell phones, email, and Twitter. The closest similar of instant messaging were telegrams. There would be tan rectangular flimsies folded and sealed inside windowed envelopes. The messages they contained bore the additional gravitas of uppercase type only, spooling from rattling teletypes onto paper strips that were automatically cut at length and pasted in one piece above the other. Telegrams intended for ship's passengers were delivered on specially printed Maiden Voyage blanks and envelopes, in those days routinely available in every Western Union office nationwide. Perhaps not surprisingly, those evocative missives have vanished today, as has the army of young men and occasionally women who had carried them to their recipients. Every one of those telegrams not only would adorn cabin mirrors in many United States cabins for the next few days, they would also be preserved, stuffed into suitcase lids, pockets, and brought home. Together with a passenger list, the earliest United States postcard, they remain forever precious memorabilia, evoking participation in that historic voyage. Margaret Truman, notwithstanding, the most significant passengers on board were the Gibbs brothers, sailing on the only voyage either would ever make in their dream ship. That first round trip to the continent and back had already been entered formally into the ship's blue, leather-bound logbook as United States Voyage No. 1. She would sail eastbound to Cherbourg and Southampton, followed by a westbound return to New York. Though never a repeat passenger, Gibbs would famously telephone the vessel every day while she was at sea, eastbound and westbound alike, conferring with technical depth with both Commodore and Chief Engineer. It must be forgotten how gratified he felt to have designed the largest vessel ever built in the United States, which would shortly become and remain forever the world's fastest. Yet despite that justifiable pride, Gibbs apparently felt no valid compunction to re-embark. Quite honestly, I expect he was just too busy, but never too busy to ensure that his entire staff responded to each time United States boomed a greeting on its way past the Wall Street office en route to sea. Gibbs and Cox's staff were encouraged and expected to observe the moment and standing briefly to attention beside their desk. Now at mid-morning on July 3, 1952, United States was about to enter formal transatlantic service, sailing from New York for the first time. Two crucial departures were involved. Well before 11 o'clock, announcements of gongs began echoing continually throughout the public. The public rooms and alleyways would urge visitors to leave with that cautionary summons as old as the sea. All ashore that's going to shore. As they always did, hundreds routinely ignored the earliest warnings. Only after several repetitions did they begin moving reluctantly towards the gangways, many calling out extended farewells to their passenger hosts. Officers and crew, increasingly impatient, hastened those chronic, champagne-infused dawdlers down both passenger and visitor gangways, off the ship and onto the pier. The words, "good riddance," as though never spoken aloud, were doubtlessly muttered. By noon, out of the starboard bridge wing were the Gibbs brothers, General and Mrs. Franklin, guests of honor Margaret Truman, and the Hortons. Commodore Manning and a pilot stood apart, ready to usher the vessel out into the channel. In Southampton, it was common practice for special sailing days for a showy or speedy departure was required to position ocean liners bow out, pointing into the stream. But no such provision had been made for the United States. When she would exit the berth traditionally, backing stern first into what was most New Yorkers referred to as the Hudson, but which nautical professionals described stubbornly as the North River. Cables had been singled up. The vessel were waiting clearance. Final release would be signaled by the color change of the standard Manhattan traffic light mounted atop the shed roof at the seaward end of the Finger Pier. This was common, and it was a failsafe against the possibility of collision with North River traffic, masked by flanking docks. When the company's marine superintendent, the only professional on the apron, was satisfied that the channel was unobstructed, he telephoned the all clear at 7 minutes past noon. Pier 86's traffic light turned from red to green. Only then all cables slipped, should the United States undock and begin moving. Incremental start of voyage number 1. With right shutter hard over and a jangle of slow astern rung on the engine room telegraph, the liner inched away and along the dock, an almost imperceptible first stirring. Yet for those who had been waiting that irresistible curtain raiser, first engine tremor and actual motion, it triggered contagious excitement. It was not so much their vessel's movement, but the persuasive sense of the apparently moving pier, spied from the open dock porthole or promenade deck window, that infused passengers, as it always does, with the thrill of voyage's beginning. Double watches would shortly stand down, bars would open, the gentle lift and fall of bows would be felt. The table reservations would be nailed down in all 3 dining rooms, the saloons, the deck chairs reserved along the promenade bridges, the sports decks. Their undisputed ownership for the crossing would be identified by name-bearing cards slipped into every chair's aluminum-framed receptacle. By the time the pilot had clambered down the Jacob's Ladder into Ambrose Light's pilot boat, as arrival and departure point for the port of New York, Ambrose Channel would continue to serve as finishing post of the North Atlantic's traditional racetrack. Along it, the world's fastest steamships hoped to capture the blue ribbon cherished prize for speed across the world's most unpredictable, roughest, and yet busiest ocean. At the racetrack's easternmost end lay United States objective, the North Atlantic's habitual starting point, a tall lighthouse erected atop Bishop Rock. Within a few days, over that revolutionary summer of 1952, Bishop Rock could and would serve for the first time as finishing rather than starting post. Bishop Rock was the name of a 114-foot or 34-meter lighthouse rising above the minuscule, otherwise uninhabited rock 4 miles west of the Isles of Scilly off Land's End, Great Britain's southwestern tip. At the time of its construction, it was second tallest in Britain. The record was held by the 160-foot Eddystone Lighthouse, located 13 miles southwest of Plymouth, the world's first offshore lighthouse. But that coveted destination lay far ahead on the afternoon of July 3rd of 1952. No sooner was his vessel committed to Track C, a brief but momentous call came down from the bridge. Commodore Manning telephoned his chief engineer, Bill Kaiser, on the engine room starting platform a dozen decks below, uttering only 3 terse words, "Wind her up." Kaiser and 138 men, engineering staff, did so with a vengeance. Oil-burning nozzles beneath the boilers roared to its fullest operation, ramping up a deluge of high-pressure steam at 925 pounds per square inch that racketed into turbine casings. Shaft revolutions increased smoothly and restlessly towards rates unseen since Jamestown. 3 hours later, United States speed had reached 30 knots and climbing. Indeed, the eastbound Maiden Voyage lasted only 3.5 days, in an era when crossings aboard every other fast ship consumed 5 days. It was so fast that the United States shipboard clocks had to be advanced 90 minutes daily instead of the customary 60. The first day's run was 696 nautical miles at an average speed of 34.5 knots, the equivalent of just under 40 miles an hour. As is commonplace among all shipboard officers and company brass sailing on a new liner, zero public conjecture was circulated about establishment of a record, just cruising alone. Bishop Rock's light was spotted for the first time from United States' bridge at 05:16 hours on the morning of July 6th as the vessel swept past the coveted goal. The good weather that had smiled on the eastbound's debut and it deteriorated into a contrary 60-knot rain-filled gale, high winds had already hurled an on-deck ping-pong table over the side, and visibility was restricted. A few passengers had slept over that historic night, and the bridge was jammed with visitors. Commodore Manning blew a long, triumphal blast on the ship's whistle, crowing excitedly that he felt like a pitcher who had completed a no-hit ball game. The United States had achieved a new and extraordinary record, completing the eastbound leg of her maiden voyage in an astonishing and unprecedented 3 days, 10 hours, and 40 minutes. Both Gibbs brothers shared in the jubilation. Indeed, everyone on board did. Meyer Davis started things off by immediately moving his players from the ballroom out into the enclosed first-class promenade. There they struck up the Star-Spangled Banner. The vessel's reception was exemplary. The weather was perfect. The armada of small boats and pleasure craft escorted the SS United States triumphantly up Southampton waters to where waiting tugs ushered her alongside the ocean dock. United States Southampton's stay was in marked contrast to the post-eastbound maiden call of newly restored Leviathan back in 1924, the last Gibbs brothers' entry into the port aboard an ocean liner they had designed. The vessel's westbound performance, bound in the opposite direction from Bishop Rock to Ambrose Light, remained consistent with eastbound's comfortability in the head mid-30s. Manning brought his ship into port of New York on the morning of July 15th. She was accompanied, as she had been in her first entry to the port after her trials, by a flotilla of tugs, ferries, and small boats. As the London Times reported, New York was preparing to give the most colorful and elaborate harbor demonstration in the history of the city. Once the vessel was alongside, a press conference took place in the ballroom. William Francis Gibbs thanked New York for the tribute, but suggested that not him alone, but many thousands of others had created the United States. There was a ticker tape parade up Broadway to City Hall the following day as Manhattan pulled out all the stops for the remarkable new champion. A momentous and jarring aftermath to the Maiden Voyage, however, put an abrupt end to Commodore Manning's bridge tender. General John Franklin, company president, and William Francis Gibbs, two men high in U.S. lines hierarchy, had been more concerned with passenger safety than breaking records. Both felt strongly that attempting the blue ribbon should have been approached cautiously. That maiden voyage speed should have been retarded until every potential engineering kink had been worked out. Despite Franklin and Gibbs' disapproval about the maiden voyage, it was on the vessel's second westbound that the die was cast, all because Manning swept arrogantly past Queen Elizabeth when leaving the western approaches without either slowing or saluting. For Franklin and Gibbs, it was the last straw. Manning's contract was terminated immediately upon the vessel reaching New York.